In this video, we're going to talk about the ketogenic diet and the state of ketosis and how it affects the body's functioning, as well as the implications for your medical practice. If you hear about the ketogenic diet, it might be easy to think, hey, this new diet fad just came out. How do I know what they're going to think about this in a couple of years? But in reality, the ketogenic diet is pretty old. It originated in the early 1920s when a Dr. Russell Wilder at the Mayo Clinic was working on recalcitrant childhood epilepsy. And he found that if he fasted the children, their epileptic seizures went down. But you can't fast kids for very long, so he had to find a way to feed them but get the same results. And he came upon what he calls the ketogenic diet. It was use of high fat and low carbohydrate for the body to shift into using ketone bodies for energy. And he was able to get these same results on epilepsy. And this gave birth to the ketogenic diet. One of the most consistent praises you'll hear of the ketogenic diet is the clarity of mental functioning. And if you remember back to the origins of the ketogenic diet, it was in use in epilepsy. So you'll see a lot of doctors that work on the central nervous system, neurologists, chiropractors, talking about and espousing a ketogenic diet. One of the beauties of the ketogenic diet is the way that it feeds the brain. The brain is only able to use two sources of energy, either glucose or ketone bodies. And when you're running off glucose as an energy source, you can fall prey to the swings in blood sugar that are happening before, during, and after a meal. Being in the state of ketosis is defined by a measurement of ketones in your blood. Specifically, there's 3 ketones that'll be in your blood. One's beta-hydroxybutyrate, one's acetoacetate, and one is acetone. When the sum of these ketones equals between 0.5 and 3 millimolar, that is defined as being in nutritional ketosis. But now how are we going to measure these? On the market, you have blood ketone meters, urinary ketone strip measurements, and breath ketones. Of these, blood measurements are far and away the best because they measure all of the forms of ketones and aren't subject to the fluctuations and the shifts in metabolism that really define the ketones that are measured in the urine or the breath. The urinary strips measure acetoacetate. Now, interestingly, acetoacetate is formed when the body is not truly fat adapted and cannot use your main ketone, beta-hydroxybutyrate. So you've got excess of it, and the liver flips it to acetoacetate, and then it comes through the urine. So in the beginning of moving into ketosis, when you're not really efficient at burning fat, you'll show a lot of the acetoacetate. And ironically, if you're using exogenous ketones, your body hasn't switched at a deep cellular level into true fat adaptation. So you're going to turn the majority of these ketones into acetoacetate, and you'll see it coming through the urine. Now you might feel all good about yourself. Oh my God, I'm in ketosis. But that's really a false sense of security and a false reading of ketosis. The breath, similarly, is measuring acetone, which is another byproduct that shows that you're not truly efficiently using beta-hydroxybutyrate. And both the urinary levels and the breath levels are fluctuating throughout the day. So the true measure of being in ketosis is the blood measurement of ketones. It's really easy to think about the ketogenic diet as a weight loss diet, but really it's an energy generation diet. It is making your cells and your mitochondria into efficient energy creating structures. In fact, when you're burning fat, you're making more energy per unit than when you're burning sugar or carbohydrates. A sugar burned all the way down for all of its energy will give you 4 kilocalories. But a fat unit will give you 9 kilocalories, and this translates into generating more ATP. Now, I first heard about ketosis and the efficiency with which you create energy about 10-15 years ago when I was sharing laboratory space with a company named Acetoacetate. Acetoacetate was doing research on treating early Alzheimer's, And although one side of the company was trying to make drugs, the other side of the company was working on this simple medical food that was MCT and whey protein. And with this medical food, the generation of ketones was able to feed the brain, and concurrent to this, they were finding that the brain's problem was that it had become insulin resistant. So the state of ketosis, or the formation of ketones, were getting past that failure to use glucose as an energy source and restoring cognitive acuity by giving the brain ketones. At the same time, they were measuring mitochondrial efficiency and damage when the body was burning either glucose or ketones. And they found that when the body's burning fat, the mitochondria not only burn brighter, but they burn more efficiently and with less mitochondrial damage from what are called reactive oxygen species. When you burn glucose, you make a lot of excess free radical damage versus when you burn fat. One of the side effects of ketosis is weight loss, especially in men. In the first week or two of being in ketosis, you can lose a large amount of water weight, as water that was stored in the muscles with glycogen comes out and releases. In addition to weight loss, other noticeable effects of the ketogenic diet include improved exercise capacity, endurance, lean muscle mass, as well as improvements in cognition, learning, and memory. The ketogenic diet can have profound benefits. And if you're like me, you want to know what's the mechanism behind those benefits? What's going on inside that cell? And one of the most intriguing and powerful things that happens when you're in ketosis is a process called autophagy, or think about it as autophagy. Phagy means to eat, auto means yourself. So autophagy means eating yourself. Now, why do we want to eat ourselves? And it's actually a more refined process than just eating yourself for energy. It's actually going into damaged cells and cellular organelles and digesting them and using their basic components to rebuild new, more perfect structures. In nature, man has periods of feasting and famine. It's during this low caloric access or times of natural fasting that you move inwardly and you digest and rebuild these structures, versus times where you have high caloric access where you lay down new body mass. And it's super important for longevity and health to swing the pendulum back and forth between laying down mass and going back and clarifying and purifying the mass that you have. In fact, I mentioned before an epidemic of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and this is specifically the failure of the body to go into this autophagic mechanism and go and rewrite and clean up the areas of the liver. The liver is regenerating super fast, and if you're constantly in excess of a high caloric, high carbohydrate diet, you're constantly storing fat into the liver until the liver is literally bursting at the seams. And the best way to purify and clean that up is during fasting and using different nutritional compounds that stimulate the same processes of autophagy using a pathway called MTOR. So you'll start to hear a lot of use of the word MTOR and the MTOR pathway. But what is MTOR? Well, MTOR means mammalian target of rapamycin. So rapamycin was actually a cancer drug. So this is actually a funny kind of name because it's named after a cancer drug called rapamycin. Rapamycin was one of those rare, very effective anti-cancer drugs, and in trying to figure out why it was so effective, they found this metabolic trigger which can go either forward or be blocked. And rapamycin didn't trigger the path to go forward, it triggered a blocking of the path. And this blocking of the path induces the process of autophagy. In the case of cancer, cancer is an unregulated overgrowth of tissue, whereas autophagy goes in and cleans away excess unregulated tissue. So the mechanism of this cancer drug was to induce autophagy. But the name, mammalian target of rapamycin, stuck. So how can we use this pathway, and how does ketosis engage this pathway? This pathway, mTOR, is driven forward in the presence of insulin and branched-chain fatty acids. And it's a trigger from your food and your environment that it's time to lay down mass and build tissue. Whereas in fasting and in ketosis, the pathway gets blocked and then stimulates autophagy. That movement inward into your body of clarifying, purifying, and taking away unwanted mass. So when mTOR moves forward, this is the signaling in your body to lay down mass. Versus when mTOR is blocked, that's the movement inward to purify the mass that you have and remove unwanted accumulations. Now, what drives mTOR forward? But the presence of insulin and branched-chain amino acids, meaning during periods of abundance, especially high carbohydrate and protein use, this path moves forward. Whereas during periods of fasting, or when your calories are derived exclusively or nearly exclusively from fat, you block that pathway and induce autophagy. Now, this brings us to one of the big failures of the paleo diet. The paleo diet was supposed to bring us into this metabolic purity, but it included so much protein that the branched-chain amino acids were driving mTOR forward, but secondarily, the process of gluconeogenesis was taking that excess protein and turning it into sugar, which was triggering insulin and also driving that pathway forward. So in a ketogenic diet, you not only restrict carbohydrates, but you also keep protein intake moderated.